I raised my glass at our lavish 10th anniversary dinner, but instead of a heartfelt toast, I handed out copies of a forensic audit to every single guest. My husband thought I was just the quiet, clueless wife, never suspecting that I had tracked every penny he stole from my inheritance to fund his second family. The room was filled with the scent of expensive lilies and the soft murmur of the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over 50 of our closest friends, business associates, and family members. Julian, my husband of a decade, sat at the head of the table, looking every bit the successful entrepreneur. He was handsome, charming, and radiating the kind of confidence that only comes from thinking you are the smartest person in the room. He smiled at me, that dazzling, rehearsed smile that had once made my knees weak. He squeezed my hand under the table, whispering that I looked beautiful, that tonight was a triumph. He had no idea that the triumph belonged entirely to me. To understand why I chose this moment, this specific, expensive, humiliating moment, you have to understand the woman I was before. For 10 years, I was Aubrey the mouse, Aubrey the quiet one, Aubrey, the orphan heiress who was so lucky to have found a protector like Julian. My parents had passed away in a plane crash when I was 22, leaving me with a substantial fortune, a portfolio of real estate, and a gaping hole in my heart. I was young, devastated, and completely unequipped to handle the sharks circling the water. Enter Julian Howard. He was 5 years older, an investment banker with grand ambitions and a shoulder to cry on. He swept in and took charge. He handled the funeral arrangements, he dealt with the lawyers, and eventually he offered to handle the burden of the finances. He told me I was too emotional, too artistic to worry about tax brackets and diversified portfolios. He said he wanted me to be free to paint, to travel, to simply exist without the weight of my legacy. I believed him. I handed him power of attorney over certain accounts. I let him merge our lives completely. I trusted him because he was my husband, and in my mind, marriage was a sacred vault where secrets didn't exist. For years, we lived a good life, or so it seemed. Julian started his own venture capital firm, supposedly using his own savings and investors' money. We had the penthouse, the cars, the galas, but there was always a weird tightness around money when it came to my personal spending. If I wanted to buy a new piece of art or plan a girls' trip, Julian would furrow his brow. He would talk about liquidity issues, market volatility, and tying up assets for long-term yield. He made me feel guilty for wanting to spend the money my parents had left me. He made me feel like a spoiled child asking for an allowance. So I shrank. I stopped asking. I clipped coupons for groceries while he drove a Mercedes I technically paid for. I played the role of the supportive, frugal wife, believing we were building an empire together. The cracks started to show about 8 months ago. It wasn't a lipstick stain or a stray hair that gave him away. It was a banking error. Julian was meticulous, usually, but arrogance makes people sloppy. I received a notification on my phone, a generic alert from a bank I didn't recognize. It was for a wire transfer confirmation of $50,000. The recipient was a frantic-sounding LLC called Willow Creek Holdings. I was confused. I didn't bank with that institution. I assumed it was identity theft. I was about to call Julian, but something stopped me. A gut instinct. That tiny voice in the back of my head that had been silenced for a decade suddenly screamed, "Do not call him." Instead, I called the bank. After navigating a maze of security questions I could only answer because my name was technically on the account as a secondary holder, I got access. The account had been opened 3 years ago. The primary holder was Julian Howard. The source of funds? Monthly transfers from my main inheritance trust. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store, staring at the transaction history on my phone screen. It wasn't just $50,000, it was hundreds of thousands. Monthly transfers, wire payments, withdrawals, and then I saw the recurring payments. Private school tuition for the twins, a mortgage on a property in a suburb 40 minutes away, a lease on a Range Rover, utility bills for a house I had never set foot in. My world didn't just crumble, it evaporated. The twins? We didn't have children. Julian had told me he was sterile. He had cried in my arms when he told me he couldn't give me a family. We had mourned that loss together. I had spent years making peace with the fact that it would just be the two of us. I went home that day and cooked dinner. I smiled when he walked in. I asked him how his day was. I watched him lie to my face about a stressful meeting with investors, knowing that he had likely spent the afternoon in that house 40 minutes away. The next day, I didn't go to the art studio. I went to a lawyer. Not the family lawyer Julian used, but a shark in a high-rise downtown who specialized in high-asset divorces and forensic accounting. I told him everything. I told him I wanted to know where every single dime had gone. Then I hired a private investigator. The report I got back 2 weeks later was thicker than a phone book. The PI, a grim-faced man named Reynolds, sat me down and slid the photos across the desk. "His name is on the birth certificates, Mrs. Howard," Reynolds said gently. "Boy and a girl, 7 years old." 7 years. He had started this second life 3 years into our marriage. I looked at the photos. There was Julian pushing a swing set in a backyard, Julian kissing a woman with blonde hair, Vanessa, Julian loading groceries into that Range Rover. They looked happy. They looked wholesome. They looked like a family funded by my dead parents' money. The woman, Vanessa, wasn't just a mistress. She was a partner. The investigation revealed she was listed as an employee on one of Julian's shell companies. She was drawing a salary of $80,000 a year for consulting, paid directly from my trust fund. She knew. She had to know. You don't get a salary for doing nothing without asking questions. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive to that house and burn it to the ground. I wanted to stab Julian with a steak knife. But I am my father's daughter, and my father was a businessman who believed that revenge is a dish best served cold, calculated, and legally binding. I went back to the lawyer. "I don't just want a divorce," I said. "I want to destroy him. I want to strip him down to the bone. I want him to leave this marriage with nothing but the suit on his back, and I want to make sure he can't even afford the dry cleaning for it." The forensic audit took months. We had to be careful. If Julian sensed I knew, he might move assets offshore or hide them in crypto. I had to play the part of the loving wife for nearly a year. I planned our 10th anniversary party with him. I let him invite his biggest investors, his boss, his college friends. I let him choose the venue, the most expensive hotel ballroom in the city. I nodded when he said we needed to spare no expense to show the world how strong we were. "It's an investment in our image, Aubrey," he had said, fixing his tie in the mirror. "People invest in stability." "You're right, darling," I had replied. "We should make sure everyone knows exactly what we're built on." And that brings us back to the dinner. The waiters had just cleared the main course, filet mignon, Julian's favorite. Champagne was being poured. Julian stood up, tapping his glass with a silver spoon. The room fell silent. He launched into a speech about love, loyalty, and the incredible journey of the last decade. "Aubrey is my rock," he said, looking at me with misty eyes. "She is the silent force behind my success. Without her support, her patience, and her unwavering trust, I wouldn't be the man I am today." The guests applauded. Some wiped away tears. I stood up, smiling. I smoothed down the silk of my red dress, a dress that cost more than Vanessa's car, bought on a credit card Julian didn't know I had reactivated. "Thank you, Julian," I said, my voice steady, amplified by the microphone. "That was beautiful and accurate. I really have been the force behind your success. Specifically, my inheritance has been the force." A few people chuckled, thinking it was a joke. Julian's smile faltered slightly, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "I actually prepared a little surprise for tonight," I continued, gesturing to the back of the room. "I know how much Julian loves transparency in business. He's always telling me that the numbers don't lie. So I decided to share the numbers with all of you." At my signal, the waitstaff, whom I had tipped extravagantly beforehand, began to circulate the room. But they weren't carrying dessert.
They were carrying bound booklets with glossy covers. The title on the cover read, "The Julian Howard Ledger, a 10-year audit of theft and deceit." "What is this?" Julian asked, his voice dropping. He reached for the copy a waiter offered him. "Go ahead, everyone, take one," I said brightly to the room. "Please, open to page 4. The room was filled with the sound of confused rustling. Julian opened the booklet. I watched the color drain from his face. It was instantaneous. He went from tan and glowing to a sickly pale gray. "Aubrey, what are you doing?" he hissed, stepping toward me. "Page 4 details the initial withdrawal," I said into the microphone, ignoring him. $3 million moved from the Howard Family Trust to a shell company in the Caymans. Julian told me this was a high-yield bond. Interestingly, the money was immediately wired to a construction firm to build a 5-bedroom house in Oak Creek, a house where a woman named Vanessa and her 2 children live. A gasp rippled through the room. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. "Aubrey, stop," Julian said, reaching for the mic. I stepped back. 2 large men in dark suits, security I had hired, stepped out from the shadows and blocked his path.
Julian froze. "If you turn to page 12, I continued, my voice hard as diamond now, you'll see the tuition payments for 2 children, twins, born 7 years ago. Julian, you remember telling me we couldn't afford a vacation to Italy last year? That was because you spent $40,000 on a new landscaping project for Vanessa's garden. It's itemized right there, line item 6. I looked out at the guests. Julian's boss was reading the booklet with his mouth open. Julian's mother was clutching her pearls, staring at her son in horror. "Julian," I said, turning to look him dead in the eye, "you spent 10 years gaslighting me. You made me feel guilty for buying a pair of shoes while you were draining my legacy to play house with another family. You thought I was stupid? You thought I was weak. We can talk about this," Julian pleaded, sweat beading on his forehead. "Aubrey, please, not here, not like this. You're ruining everything." "I'm not ruining anything," I said calmly. "I'm just balancing the books. You see, everyone, this isn't just a pamphlet. This is evidence. As of this morning, copies of this audit have been sent to the IRS, the District Attorney's Office for Fraud and Embezzlement, and your partners at the firm." Julian looked at his business partner, a man named Marcus. Marcus slowly closed the booklet, stood up, and looked at Julian with pure disgust. "Is this true, Julian? Did you use the firm's accounts to launder this money?" It's complicated," Julian stammered. "It's not complicated," I interjected. "It's theft. And Julian, you should know, I filed for divorce yesterday. My lawyers were granted an emergency injunction this morning. Your accounts are frozen. The joint accounts are frozen. The assets in the shell companies are frozen. Even the cards in your wallet right now, they've been canceled." Julian patted his pocket, pulling out his phone. He tapped frantically. He looked up at me, terror in his eyes. "You have nothing," I told him. "The house in Oak Creek? My lawyers are already moving to seize it as a fruit of stolen funds. Vanessa will be receiving an eviction notice within the week. I will sue her for every salary payment she accepted, knowing it was stolen money." I took a sip of my champagne. It tasted like victory. "I suggest you leave, Julian," I said. "The police are on their way to discuss the embezzlement charges regarding the investors' money you dipped into when my trust fund started running low. Oh, did I forget to mention that part? Page 20. You got greedy, darling." The room erupted. Investors were shouting. Julian's mother was sobbing. Julian stood there, a king stripped of his crown, his clothes, and his dignity. He looked at me one last time, a mix of hatred and bewilderment. "How?" he whispered. "You never checked the accounts." "I didn't," I agreed, "until you got sloppy. You underestimated me, Julian." That was your first and last mistake. Security escorted him out before the police arrived. I didn't watch him go. Instead, I turned to the stunned room. "I apologize for ruining the mood," I said, "but I couldn't think of a better way to celebrate 10 years of survival. Please, enjoy the dessert. I paid for it after all." I walked out of that ballroom with my head high. I didn't go back to the penthouse. I had already packed my things and moved them to a new place, a place solely in my name. The fallout was nuclear. Julian was arrested that night. The forensic audit was airtight. It turned out he hadn't just stolen from me, he had been running a Ponzi scheme with his firm's capital to keep up the lifestyle for 2 families. He's currently awaiting trial and looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. As for the money, my lawyers are ruthless. We are clawing back everything. We seized the house in Oak Creek. Vanessa tried to play the victim, claiming she didn't know he was married, but the text messages we subpoenaed proved otherwise. She knew about me. She called me the ATM. She lost the house, the car, and is currently facing charges as an accomplice to fraud. I managed to recover about 60% of what he stole, which is more than I expected. But the money isn't the point. The point is that for a decade, I made myself small to make him feel big. I let him control the narrative because I was afraid of being alone. I thought love meant sacrifice, but I learned that night that self-respect is worth more than any relationship. I'm sitting in my studio now, painting again. It's quiet, but it's a peaceful quiet, a clean quiet. I don't have a husband, and I don't have the naive trust I used to have, but I have my dignity, I have my freedom, and I have the satisfaction of knowing that the quiet, clueless wife was the one who roared the loudest in the end. Julian wanted a legacy. I gave him one. His name will be studied in forensic accounting classes for years to come as the perfect example of how not to hide assets. Success really is the best revenge, but watching him read page 4 of that audit, that was a close second.